When I first started talking about skills-based organisations, there's lots of the parts of the business that don't really understand what that means. So it's about finding a different way of attacking it that gets them where they want to go, but you're actually taking them off in the right direction. And you've got to be ready to make that journey wiggly if that's what it needs to be. The key thing is to build your credibility quickly. And that's that whole curiosity, asking questions, exploring. There can be no plan until you've spoken to as many people as you can speak to and you've understood the business and what they're trying to achieve. Sometimes it's about start small, scale up. So you give all your focus to a particular business group and you really give them everything in terms of the skills training, the guidance, the drop-in clinics, everything, so that you've then got your case study for this is what we've done, this is what we can do elsewhere.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, So Energy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.
Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, I want to start by, when you're talking to your friends and family, how do you explain what you do for your job? Assuming they don't work in talent themselves.
No, they don't. It is actually quite hard because normally most people are familiar with human resources, HR. Oh, you're one of those people. But then you said, but I work more on the training side, leadership development, developing the organisation, and they usually glaze over and move on.
You've obviously been in this space, and I mean, the naming itself probably tells you the changes in how we perceive HR people, talent, and all of the different variations. But I wanted to start with, given you've worked in so many different organisations and in this space, what is that thing you know today that you wish you knew back then coming into this space?
I think it's kind of a difficult question to answer because the area of HR that I'm in can be called so many different things. But I think the one thing is that learning and development isn't just training. That's kind of the one thing I've learned as I've gone on my journey in the roles, being called different things, I suppose.
And I guess that kind of leads me well to, what is that common misconception or misunderstanding people have about your role, right? Like when you join the organisation, I know at James Fisher, you're just over a year now. What's that common misconception? They think you join with this title and you're like, we think you're going to do X.
It's exactly the same as I've just said, actually. So yes, just been with James Fisher for a year. The function was previously called Learning and Development, but when I came in, it was rebranded to be Talent Management. Okay. And yeah, straight away, what training are you offering? Are you offering me training in caliper training for Norway? Are you offering me this training in Aberdeen? So yeah, you do get that a lot.
So talk me through the rebrand. What was driving that decision? Because I asked this, is one of the most frequent conversations I've had in recent times with different people within L&D is around the naming of it, right? Like, and this is not a new conversation. I feel like it sometimes picks up again and then dies down. But I've heard, talent development, learning and performance and something else. There's so many different variations. But what was the driving factor around kind of talent management and moving away from that learning and development?
So I think really I joined as the CHRO who joined 3 months before me.
Right.
And so I think one of her driving forces was trying to position what the function can contribute in a more strategic way.
Right.
So trying to take away from this notion that it was about learning and development, just training, and trying to broaden out what its contribution could be.
So you joined the organisation just about a year ago. Where do you start with developing the strategy? Where you've got a new CHRO, where do you start?
So it's trying to understand where the organisation is in its journey. And so with James Fisher, it was an organisation that had a new CEO about 2.5 years ago. Previously, it had been 26, 27 individual companies around the world doing their own thing, completely decentralised. and the business needed to address that operating model. So it was changed into 3 divisions. So we have a division that focuses on defence, on energy, and on maritime transport, which is our heritage side of the business. And through that, they're trying to bring together the One James Fisher.
Right.
So it's trying to understand that journey, where they are, where the challenges are, talking to as many different stakeholder groups as you can, and then looking at the tools that the talent management or talent development, however we want to sort of call it, the tools that we have to help bring that journey to fruition.
And so, that seems quite aligned to where you're starting with is there's this business challenge of bringing quite a fragmented organization together and all the kind of challenges that come with that. Talk me through the process of how that turns into your strategy, right? Like, what does that actually look like? Are you talking to different stakeholders across the organization? And what does that strategy look like at the end of it?
So you try to meet as many people as quickly as possible and as many people in the different business groups, but also the geographic locations. Because quite often in my experience with the companies that I've been in, they usually describe themselves as international companies with global locations.
Right.
So, they're either US and they try to drive a US approach to everything in all their international locations. James Fisher, obviously British company, etc. So it's trying to help figure out how we're going to be more collaborative globally. So what can be those common threads? What are the company values? What's the company mission? What are those key phrases that can really help join to create that red thread that we then weave everywhere? So whether that's through the performance management, through the learning and development offerings, and then you start getting into kind of how far your scope exists within that company. So whether that's includes organisational development, team dynamics, just constantly weaving that red thread into everything.
I guess, what are the challenges and what have you seen work for you in terms of overcoming the challenges around having this one entity, but still being able to personalize at that kind of local level, right? Making it both, I guess, culturally relevant, but also personalized to the context of how the organization operates there, because there might be different ways of how people are managed and what the culture of the organization is on the ground. Talk me through the challenges and how you navigate that when you're thinking about developing a strategy that needs to meet the needs of all of these fragmented offices.
I mean, usually I'm kind of starting from scratch. So it's about finding out what are those processes that need to be global and are consistent. And then at what point do you say, okay, you can allow local flavour now? So it's about working with the broader HR team as well, because so often what we do in the sort of talent space is also aligning and reinforcing what the global HR operating processes are. So it's everything is teamwork. Everything is understanding your connection to the next person, to the next person.
And is that a key piece for you to be able to align your strategy to the broader business strategy?
Absolutely.
And how do you evaluate whether you are aligned, right? Like, how do you know? What are you looking out for to see whether your strategy is aligned to what the broader business needs to see?
So, I mean, for me, one of the key things that I always go to is performance management. So performance management is often an underutilised or underappreciated tool process. So I tend to use that to try and, number one, it allows you to get access to the leadership team, because what I will always try and do is draw its connection to the business priorities. In order to understand the business priorities, you need to be working with those leadership groups. So it gives you a bit of an open door to go and have those conversations, sit in meetings, understand the strategy and understand what's going on. And through that, you can start to say, okay, I've got a lever there that I can help, or there's a lever over there, or that's a product that would work really well in that. So it's about using the performance management process to help you learn about the business and then understand what your priorities are, but then also help to start educate the broader workforce on how they can connect to those company priorities.
I love that. So you're using almost performance management to open the door, start the conversation, and they're now sharing information not from the lens of this is what training I need,
Yeah.
but just actually talking about business performance.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
that. And so that performance management piece, right? Like I hear it as a challenge through many people leaders that I speak to around a framework for managing performance, and it's probably one of the areas they struggle the most with, managers being able to manage performance. I imagine you've tried different things over the years at different organizations. Are there things that you think this has really worked or this hasn't really worked when it comes to performance management?
So performance management fundamentally is that conversation between the people leader and the employee having the opportunity to understand how their contribution matters and how it's going to deliver against the business results that everybody's working towards. So the key thing is getting your people leaders on board with understanding the power of performance management and constantly educating that it's not the annual appraisal process of setting objectives at the beginning of the year and, you flash them out at the end of the year, you put a rating in and job's done. It's really about educating how if you do it well and you have it as a living, breathing process throughout the year, look at the results that you can achieve. And sometimes it's about start small, scale up. So you give all your focus to a particular business group and you really give them everything in terms of the skills training, the guidance, the drop-in clinics, everything, so that you've then got your case study for this is what we've done, this is what we can do elsewhere.
And what do you see as the pushback? Like, I mean, we've gone through that process ourselves, right? And I've heard it, that common themes when I speak to other organizations around like challenges with defining what good looks like and, how you then go on to operationalize to say, are you good or are you just below good and operational? What have you seen work?
So I think it's about the objectives that get set and it's about supporting those individuals to achieve those objectives. But because you're regularly monitoring them, if the business changes, if the direction changes, they change too. So that living, breathing process allows the employee to be anchored to what's going on. So it's not just then about the objective, it's they're getting the business information and all of that comes together. So it really is about achieving those objectives. What an organisation decides to do in terms of the ratings and the connection to salary and bonus, etc., kind of depends on the maturity of the organisation in some of those other aspects as well. Most of the organisations that I work with, it tends to be kind of a factor within a whole portfolio of other factors.
Right.
But what we try to do is drive the fact that if that team has achieved all those objectives at the end of the year, they can celebrate that. So it's complicated when you get to the rating piece of it. But if you think about it from that basic motivation of an employee wants to come to work and do a good job, they want to make a positive contribution, and that allows them to see that they've made it.
And so once you've had this kind of performance management related conversation with people leaders across the business, you're then identifying, bottlenecks or gaps that they feel like they have in their team. How do you then identify, okay, here are the kind of learning and development opportunities for you, and this is what's going to inform your L&D strategy?
So one of the things that we've been doing is looking at introducing, this is a company that's not really done performance management before other than the beginning of end of year process, is we've for the first year this year moved them to the 4 conversations, so the quarterly conversations. Right. We've set out right at the beginning that we want to do quarterly conversations. We're aware that sounds heavy to the organisation, so we've kept the Q1 and the Q3 check-ins light. So just some general comms, some tools that we make available on the learning platform. But we do deeper dives for the mid-year and the end of year. So both of those are more guided. So the performance review system that we have allows us to push out questions. So it allows that people leader to have a bit of a safety net in terms of these are the questions that I've got to ask you because I don't know what else to ask. So they're given that crutch to help guide that conversation. So if what we've done at the end of this year is enabled 2 good, meaty conversations, we've achieved more than before. So it's teasing them through the process and building it. And then we're looking at the statistics behind that in terms of how many people completed those conversations. Because you push them out, they close. So you can see who's closed them, who's not closed them. One of the other things that we're planning on doing with the results of the engagement survey this year is we've already correlated 5 questions in the annual employee survey to the performance management process. So we want to go in and look at those, see who's done well in those questions against their completion rates on the performance management, find those managers, and then start talking about what's working for them, and then do a bit of a showcase around that kind of thing. So you're constantly looking for those opportunities to demonstrate it works if you put the effort in at the beginning, and it's not as complicated as you think it is.
But is there an additional complexity, just touching on the fact that there's so many geographies involved here, and these are essentially people who are part of different companies to start with? How do you make sure there's that kind of sense of shared purpose, and actually this is the standard we're setting and we need everyone to come to this? There's 2 things there. So there's 2 reaches that we're doing right now. So one is there's an annual senior leadership conference. So that was one of the first large group meetings that I went to in October last year. So you start to set out what you're planning to do for the following year. So we kind of started to tease out what we were planning to achieve in the coming year. So this year we get to go back to that group and say, okay, this is what we agreed we would do with you here in the room, and this is what we've achieved. So you start to also, you're building trust with that leadership team that if they put that effort in, they do actually see results. And then the other piece that's now coming in, because now you start weaving different pieces in, is we've just designed a new leadership framework for the organisation. So that's been built looking at, the research in terms of the academic research, what the companies are doing, what the consultancies are doing, and then layering in what that looks and feels like for James Fisher with some focus groups with our own leaders. So we've got that leadership framework signed off, and we're about to pilot with a group of 40 leaders in October, some initial training around that framework. And that's where we continue to talk about performance management, communication, and we'll start to introduce some standard tools that provide them with those crutches, that, to help them with those kind of conversations and build their confidence. That then rolls out throughout the next 6 months in the first half of 2026 around the world. Right.
So that's where it's not just one thing, you've got to bring multiple things into attack.
And, I know in previous conversations we've had, a lot of things you're doing at James Fisher, it's the first time it's happening at James Fisher, right? But I imagine there are people who've been there for many years, and so there's almost a change of perception of what kind of talent stands for and what it means to learn and develop. How do you change that perception, right? Like, if I've been used to, up until now, I just do training, you send me an email, I go do that training, and now you're trying to change people to think about this as a way of improving their performance and driving career growth. What are things that have worked for you or not worked for you in trying to change the perception?
So the things that work are finding those business leaders who can be your comrade in arms. So they're on the same mission you are. Right. They've worked in different organisations and seen what good can look like. And then you just hook up and you make those relationships work. We're doing one right now on a skills project, looking at developing a functional skills framework for one of our groups, and then how we can build the development and the career pathing on from that. Some of the leaders that we've been working with over the last few months look like we've come from Mars and they haven't got a clue what we're talking to, and it's a lot of work. But with a lot of perseverance, particularly from the business leader, because you make them front and centre, because it is about the business side of it. I am an enabler of that process. I sat in on her leadership meeting last week, and the group were calibrating some of the first results of the skills matrix work. And one of the leaders sat there and said, this has been a very interesting piece of work, which is a very big statement for him. I finally get it. I now understand by looking at the skills in that business to that business, these people aren't doing the same roles, but they think they are, And so it was like, yay, finally we've got it. So it's about finding the right business partners to work with. If you try and go out on your own as HR, it's really hard.
Yeah. And I was going to ask around getting that business case, right? So is it a case of, it sounds like you almost build momentum by bit, showing a bit of proof. They start to see the early signs of, I can see where the value is in this. But I guess to get that early adoption to come along on this journey, right? It's a big bit of change management. So how do you get the buy-in? Because it's quite often the most common thing I get asked is around business case, right? We often get, especially going on the skills journey and you've trying to develop a skills strategy and think about how do I build the framework, etc. There is a lot of effort and you can't do it all alone in HR and L&D. And so you do need to get people's buy-in. What's the business case? How'd you pitch it?
So I think with the skills piece, it's quite difficult to tackle it head on. So even in conversations when I first started talking about skills-based organisations, there's lots of the parts of the business, even the HR function, that don't really understand what that means. So trying to go it that way is quite difficult. So it's about finding a different way of attacking it that gets them where they want to go, but you're actually taking them off in the right direction. And you've got to be ready to make that journey wiggly if that's what it needs to be. But the way we've been doing it is by this particular business leader with her group, she needs to standardise performance. So, okay, skills can be our language to do that. So it's just about finding how to open the door. And then there's always the longer term plan that, I've got in the back of my mind. But if I share that, they won't understand where we're going.
Yeah. So it's almost finding the what's in it for me.
Yeah.
For that first person who you need to get on board and then slowly reveal where you want to get to and what that big picture is.
And it didn't take long.
Right.
Because we did one of the strategy meetings earlier in the year. And when you start talking, the business leader, I started talking about what we were doing. Oh, I'd like my function to do that. Could I go on that list? And in the end, we had to say, we'll work with a max of 4 functions this year. So it doesn't take a lot. It's just they don't necessarily look at it from that perspective. They're looking at it from an operations perspective, not necessarily from a people performance perspective.
What role is technology played in helping you operationalize your strategy, right? Especially given you've got such a large fragmented audience around the world. Are there particular scenarios that you think actually without tech we couldn't have done this and this is what was really effective about it?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need an element of tech. I mean, in the organisations I've worked with, we usually are starting small and scaling up, so we don't have a huge amount of technology to start with. So what you do have, you try to leverage. But it does provide a consistent user experience. It allows you to standardise a process, keeping it as simple as you can to start with. Obviously, you're looking for something that can at least be in your basic languages. We've had some hit and miss experiences with that recently. But yeah, tech does make things more visible. And then it allows you to extract the data to show what you are achieving, however kind of slow those incremental movements are, but that you are achieving.
And was that quite new to, I know, James Fisher had only started using HANA around about just before, I think, your time, but it was fairly new to the organisation. And has that been a challenge to launch that behaviour of adopting digital learning and using that to capture knowledge and share? What are the challenges you've seen and how have you overcome that?
So we have data challenges. So we have some challenges in terms of our broader, we still work with spreadsheets. It's the easiest way to say things. We kind of have a core data system for part of the business, but we're also still working with spreadsheets. So trying to access reliable data to put into How Now, we call it our James Fisher Learning Platform, has been really challenging. And I know your team have been very patient with me as I've pulled my hair out at various stages trying to work on that. But we are getting there. So we are making improvements, which is great. So yeah, data's been really difficult. And then it's the same thing. It's the same thing about adoption and change. It's who's going to be your early adopters.
Yeah.
Who are those audiences that are going to grab it? I mean, yes, when I came in, how now, I think it might have gone live about like 4 or 5 months before I started, but nobody thought about the personalised content. Nobody thought about why people would be going there. Just, it's here. It's not enough.
Yeah.
So there has to be a purpose to the platform that you're bringing in. So, yeah, I think it's difficult. Your data needs to be there, but it's so helpful. Even the most simple system is going to move you forward. You don't have to have Wizzy, and quite often it's not helpful to have Wizzy.
It's interesting because we were talking about this just before we started in research for this interview. I was looking at all the companies you've been at, and there is a fairly consistent theme that a lot of these companies are going through significant transformation, and quite often under pressure to go through transformation, right? And I was like, that's an incredible experience to have under your bag of just going into, and you're obviously willingly putting yourself in this situation. But I'd love to know, when you kind of step back and reflect on any kind of patterns that you're seeing around, this is a common challenge and this is how I tackle it now. Now I know. Now I walk into an organization going through transformation, I see this and I know, okay, this is the approach. Are there things that stand out to you?
Well, I don't know how I end up in these situations all the time, but I do. I must be mad, but anyway, I guess for me, it's all relationship building. The key thing is to build your credibility quickly. And that's that whole curiosity, asking questions, exploring. There can be no plan until you've spoken to as many people as you can speak to, and you've understood the business and what they're trying to achieve. Not just what they're trying to achieve, but how they want to achieve it. The kind of culture, the tone. Sometimes you just got to be careful not to make any assumptions about cutting and pasting one thing into another organisation. Some of the fundamentals are the same, but the flavour actually makes quite a big difference.
And so a big part of it is just, you get to know the organisation. Yeah. And, I think sometimes this is understated, because quite often some of the challenges I see in initiatives that are launched across organisations is like, who did you speak to before this one out, right? And that's why it was quite interesting when you said you do focus groups. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, well, I think quite early on in my career, one of the leadership standards that the organisation had included the phrase play catch, and it kind of stuck with me. It's very difficult globally to get people to understand it, but it stuck with me. In terms of you have to throw out different ideas, because you've got to test the boundaries of what is right and wrong. So it's having conversations with the CHRO, with one of the divisional leads of, do you like that? Oh, does that mean you'd like that? Oh, okay, so it's not that, it's over here. So it's having those conversations to understand the boundaries of what you're there to do for them.
Given there is so much change, right, and you're dealing with change management, what do you do to keep growing yourself, right? Like to make sure you're learning and remaining relevant and being able to keep adding value? Is it certain things you do?
So you go through different phases, because obviously sometimes it gets really manic with the projects that you're working on. But particularly, I guess, the last 2-3 years, I've become a bit podcast mad. But if somebody invites you to something like a conference or, a vendor wants to showcase something and they're bringing somebody in, you just say yes. Because you just see so many different companies and the challenges they're having, whether they're big, small, they're actually the same challenges that you're having. It's just the context is slightly different, or the scale is slightly different. But it's those opportunities to say, yeah, I can take that. So, yeah, just constantly trying to absorb different perspectives on it.
It's one of my favourite things. And I know, Emma, you've come to breakfast events and things like that. And it's one of my favourite things is when you feel in the room where the sectors are different, and like you said, the size of the organisation and shapes of them are completely different. But you're going around and someone says a challenge and you just see the room nodding. and it does really call out the those kind of differences and nuances are there, but the fundamental challenges quite often that we're overcoming are very, very similar. It's one of my favorite things. It's that relatability to go beyond firmographics of around your organization, to go, actually this challenge is a priority, and being able to share those ideas regardless of your sector. Is there like a great bit of advice you've been given that kind of stuck with you early in your career, and then you've kind of all the way through carried this with you?
I don't know, it's a piece of advice. I think I was really lucky with some of my HR leaders early on in being allowed to just go anywhere I wanted to go in the organisation. So, there'd be a meeting it was actually a business meeting in Shanghai, and it was on nothing to do with HR. But they were struggling with some of the facilitation for some of the sessions. So it was, Emma, would you go? Oh, okay. So you go. And I mean, at that point in my career, I was like, I'm not kind of sure what I'm going to contribute there, but you're there to facilitate. So I went, and it was very appreciated. And next thing I knew, I had 3 more meetings to go to. So it was just go anywhere. If there's an opportunity to attend a meeting or meet somebody, just go and do it.
I think that's a beautiful note to wrap up on. Emma, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, SoEnergy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.